Okay, we might get this workshop underway because we do have some time constraints, so thanks to Gary and the team before us. Introducing the panel will be fairly easy and quick because I think most of you already know who we have on the panel. Fiona Reynolds is CEO of AIST. Fiona became the CEO of AIST when the merger of AIST, CMSF and IFS Training and Compliance Department on the 1st of January 2007, and she's worked in the super industry for 13 years. Pauline Vamos also is well known to you as the Chief Executive Officer of ASFA. Pauline took up this position in September 2007 and, as you probably were aware until recently, was Director of Financial Services Regulation, Licensing and Business Operations Directorate at the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, which is where most of us got to know Pauline. Richard Gilbert is well known to you as well, Chief Executive Officer of the Investment and Financial Services Association in Australia. He represents the financial services sector that manages over $1.2 trillion on behalf of more than 12 million Australians. Richard is also the inaugural chairman of the International Investment Funds Association, the global voice of funds managers associations with total member holdings of $22.4 trillion US. And of course, David Whiteley, Executive Manager of Industry Super Network, which ISN is responsible for the coordination of industry fund collective strategies, including the Compare the Pair advertising campaign. And of course, you would also know that David is Director of HESTA, ACSI, AIST, ACTU, Member Connect, and also an alternate Director for Australian Super. So would you please welcome our panel. Today we're here to talk about the key policy issues, and I thought what better way to begin this session, and I thought we'd start with Fiona Reynolds. But Fiona, if you were the Treasurer when budget night comes around, what are the things that you would do to address superannuation on behalf of Australian workers?
I wish I was the Treasurer on budget night, but I'm not. Well, I think definitely I'd be wanting to look at the areas of the low paid and women. I mean, they're still the people who miss out when it comes to superannuation, and it's a time we address those issues. So to me, it'd be extension of the co-contribution scheme, so it can be helping more people. Definitely a paid maternity leave scheme from which super was paid. Its time has definitely come, and a lift in the age pension.
The last one was?
A lift in the age pension.
Lifting the age pension, okay.
I didn't mean in lifting the age of the age pension, I meant giving them more money.
Okay.
Yes.
I was going to say, if we're going to lift the age, I think we'd have a full hall to debate that with you.
Yes.
Pauline, are we going to have consensus here, or is ASFA taking a different view? What, if you were addressing the Treasurer and telling him what he should talk about on budget night, what would you have him do?
Well, a lot of what Fiona said, of course, we'd agree with, but I would also say we want at least 50% of the tax cuts put into superannuation and an opt-out, so that people who really needed the money today could opt out, but generally they could take advantage of some greater amounts into super.
Okay. Richard, from the fund manager's perspective and the financial planners?
Look, yeah, if I were Wayne Swan, I'd be asking the Treasury to give me data on what the adequacy levels will be in 20 years' time, or in 12 years' time, 2020. What have we got there? But 22% full self-sufficiency, only 22% of the population not relying on the age pension or part thereof. It's not good numbers, and the RIM group came out last year and said that the system's fully funded. There's no problems with adequacy, yet that's wrong because they included the pension data in there. So the self-sufficient system's propped up by the pension data. And so you say, where are the needs? If you look at the age cohorts and the income cohorts, you're talking about people. You've got to remember that SG's only been in since 98, fully in 98 or whenever that phase-in happened. So people who have had 40 years of full SG input aren't many. There's not many of them. And so we've got to look at people who are missing that full 40 years. We've got to look at women. They're very much underprovided. Low-income earners, itinerants. So I say, when I get that advice from Treasury, I say, well, let's crank up the benefits to the low paid, and let's look at going from 9 to 12 somehow, and not for everybody, because we know that the tax advantages for people on 100k or thereabouts are great, and they do salary sacrifice, and there's high levels of contribution there, and I'll run those figures past later in this session. And so I say, look at those low income earners, look at the women, and boost the 9%. And do it iteratively. I think one of the great things about the SG, we iterated from 3 to 9 over a number of years, and you'll reduce the impact. Do it iteratively, such that employees and probably the government, and possibly through the lower front-end tax, that 15% is a Barry Crocker when it comes to people on low incomes. They've probably got an effective marginal rate or effective tax rate of 15 at best, even lower. And so the super tax is greater than the contributions tax. And so I think we have to use the very powerful computer that the ATO's got to dial up or dial down a better contributions tax for low-income earners.
David, I can't believe it, but Richard Gilbert from IFSA has just stolen your platform and he's now championing the merits of low-paid workers.
Right.
Can you believe it?
We've taught him well.
That's very welcome.
David, what would you say to the Treasurer?
Look, I think firstly I'd want to investigate, perhaps again we can get this computer at the ATO to do it for us, to investigate the effect that fees and commissions and performance and how the system actually works has on adequacy. And before I was going to be putting in more money into the system, given the tax concessions of about $22 billion a year now, before putting more money into the system, I'd be looking at how the system could operate more efficiently. And we might have a look at how financial advice system works. We might have a look at how the default system in Australia works at the moment.
Okay. Pauline, adequacy. I mean, it's. I suppose as a long-time ASFA member and an ASFA supporter, I was quite surprised recently to hear you say that adequacy in terms of 9%, you weren't necessarily supporting the push for 15%.
As you know, Michael, our fundamental policy position is still very much 15, and indeed 15 by 15, and to quote Richard in an incremental way. But the government has said very, very clearly an increase in SGC, at least in the short term, is not on. So we need to respond to that. And we've said, well, we can't have compulsory SG. What other ways can we do this? And there were 3, of course. Enhancing the co-contribution regime, as Fiona mentioned, looking at other incentive type or default type mechanisms like soft compulsion, as well as extending the salary sacrifice availability across the industry. There's still a lot of opportunity there for people to contribute, and what we want to do with compulsory is that they're looking at ways, different mechanisms, providing people with different choice, and also part of that, of course, is allowing them access to affordable advice on single issues like how much they could contribute and how quickly and how easily they can raise it to 15%.
Fiona, you've taken some very strong public stances about adequacy in recent times. Do you think that's a soft approach? Is that letting the government off the hook?
Yeah, look, I do have some concerns about soft compulsion. Obviously, I don't have any concerns about people bargaining for additional super. People do it all the time. We do it in our workplace. But I think if our answer to adequacy is going to be that the government doesn't need to get involved, everyone can just do it themselves, and we end up with a 2-tiered system of the haves and have-nots, even more than what we've got already, then I've got concerns about that. And I really think that the success of our system and why it's the envy of around the world is because it's compulsory and universal. So I just have some concerns about that. I think on the adequacy issue, one of the important things that we have to address first is exactly what is it? What is adequacy? AIST and ISN did a review of a whole lot of papers and current thinking on literacy, on adequacy, not that long ago. And we found that there really wasn't an agreement. And as Richard was saying, some of the papers and some of the formulas include the age pension, some don't, some say 60%, some say 70%, some say 50%. So I think before we can even do anything about adequacy, we need to have an agreed government and industry view on exactly what it is. And then we need to work out the best and simplest way of achieving it. And it can't be that difficult, really. I mean, we've got to 9%. It took us a while to get there. It can't be that more difficult over a longer period to get to 15%. And maybe it needs to be about government contributions and personal contributions. Those that earn more pay more personal contributions, and those that earn less get government contributions. I don't think it's that hard. It just takes the will of the government.
David, in relation to that research that Fiona was just talking about, and bearing in mind we're sitting on a huge surplus at the moment, and the Treasurer is going to make some announcements when his budget rolls around. We've got the tax cuts coming up. I mean, your view on the 15% after the research, and even feel free to comment on where the tax cut should go too.
Well, look, the key finding of the research was the fact that, and it was something I alluded to earlier on, and hopefully we can have a discussion about it today. The key finding of the research was that every report and investigation into adequacy presupposes that fund performance across the sector is exactly the same. It presupposes fees are the same, there's no difference in cost, and there's no difference in investment performance. In terms of increasing adequacy, the complexity of it, of course, is it's as Fiona says, it's about political will. It's whether the government is seriously going to increase compulsory contributions, and if so, where that in practical terms is going to come from. And is it going to come off through some wage trade-off? Is it going to come through some tax trade-off? And it'll take a reasonably brave government to impose employers increasing contributions, and similarly probably take a reasonably brave government to impose it upon employees too. Okay.
Richard, you've already had a word on adequacy, so I'll pass on this one for you. But Pauline, you and I have had discussions in the past, and the big question when governments come to power, and this is a new government, who do they talk to? And I know you've got some views about, you know, how far and wide should the government be looking when they're looking for views? I mean, quite frankly, we've got 4 organisations up here which probably would aggregate the views of the community, but what's your view on that?
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. Look, number one, it is important that the government does speak to the industry, the experts in the industry, both in terms of the participants, the consumers in the industry, but also given the position of super, and listening to a little bit to the previous panel, there are enormous opportunities for us and there's enormous risks, and so the government should be looking at super in a holistic sense. We have enormous economic firepower. We own 25% of the listed securities on the stock exchange. So to me, and to ASFA, it's not just thinking about super, but when the government thinks of super, they should be thinking of wider economic issues and speaking to economists, statisticians, particularly about adequacy, health professionals, aged care professionals, because of course we now have a lot of data indicating the 3 stages of retirement because of a longevity risk, and the fact what is adequate, the first stage of retirement may not be the same figure as at the later end of retirement. Certainly the work we do through the Westpac ASFA retirement standard indicates to us to have a comfortable retirement, a couple would need to have an investment sum of $500,000 to get about $50,000 a year, which would be about $10,000 less than the average income. But it's horses for courses, and you've got to look at the people's whole wealth position.
Fiona, would you agree with that? I mean, in terms of, at the moment, the government seems to have had a wide range of people included on their advisory panels and so forth. I mean, should it be widened even further than it is, or do you think it's inclusive enough?
Certainly, I agree that it should be widened. I mean, I think the point that Pauline made is very valid, that there's a lot of people, it's not just the superannuation industry that's concerned obviously about retirement incomes, it's a lot broader part of the population, and there should be other people spoken to about it. But obviously people in the industry have got a lot of knowledge about superannuation, so it's important that they engage with us as well.
David, it probably leads on a little bit to advice too, in terms of these stages of retirement and how important advice is going to be to people. You've made some comments at various times about financial planners acting in the best interests of their client, and what sort of changes that those 2 or 3 words could make to the standard of financial advice. Do you want to make some comments on that, as to, or enlighten the audience as to how those few words could change that standard?
Okay. I think firstly, and I took the liberty, and I hope you don't mind, of actually writing this down to make sure I got it right. I think firstly, the discussion around whether advice should be in the best interest of a client hinges upon how you actually then define best interest. And I think as a first step, the report that came out of the Joint Parliamentary Inquiry into Superannuation last year conceded that it is perfectly legal for an advisor to provide advice to someone on a superannuation product which he or she may privately know is not the best product for them. Now, the context of $1.5 trillion, in the context of this being the future of someone's dignity in their retirement, I just don't think that test is good enough. So we've given a lot of thought to this, and there's been a lot of people involved, and we've come to the point trying to define exactly what a best interest test might be. Now, advice in the best interest of a client would be just that. It would be in their interest. There would be no conflict attached to it, so the advice would be impartial when provided by the advisor. It would have attached to it a reasonable basis test, so it would be measured against the sort of reasonable duty of care and of diligence in providing that advice, and in terms of remuneration would be based on some form of time-based fee. This doesn't immediately mean that if someone were to receive some advice and they didn't receive the very best performing product in any given period of time, that are immediately going to be sued by their clients. We don't tend to sue lawyers simply because they lose a case. We don't tend to sue the doctor because he or she doesn't make us better immediately. It's very much about the process through which the advice is given as opposed to necessarily the outcome itself.
David, do you think anyone gets excited by this topic? I mean, you've been pushing this barrow for some time, and I just wonder whether, I'm even wondering in the audience, whether or not people sort of tend to nod off a little bit about... I'm sorry?
We get excited.
Richard gets excited, but I know
very
which side of the
passionate
fence
about
you're
this
going to get excited about. Yeah, David, I mean, is it hard to engender interest in this? I mean, do you have glaring examples of where people have been misadvised?
Well, can you get people excited about superannuation? Is the first question. I mean, this is a product where you've got incredible trillions of dollars of people being invested, and yet you've got around about 95 or 90% plus of the population who invest super don't actually choose a fund. The very fundamental decision about superannuation would be you would choose your own fund, and yet 90% plus of the population don't do that. A debate around, the regulation of financial advice, I strongly suspect, doesn't really get the blood flowing for most people, no. But it is critically important, and it is critically important to the national savings of our country. So it's a debate that we should have, and hopefully in forums like this is a debate that people want to engage with.
Richard, to get your blood flowing, so I mean, is this more common than you would have us be aware of?
I'm really pleased that David has moderated somewhat his position on best advice. He's really getting very close to appropriate advice, which is the current standard, and because he's saying reasonable, that's different to best, and I think we've got to be very careful. It's good for super trustees to act in the best interests of their clients, of their members, because you're talking about an amorphous single body. But once you get someone before you, you have to give them the best advice. So, and that means there's only one best when I went to school, and we've got to be very careful about not raising the bar so high. Look, advisors in this country haven't done as badly as some would make them out, and I think it's important we think about that. We did not get white shoe salesmen on the streets when Choice came in. We did not get life agents flogging products to people that were totally inappropriate. We've had a very low level of disputation in this country with advice. I am really pleased that industry funds are going to pay out of their product for advice because they see that as critical to members. It's worth giving you a couple of figures here if I could, Michael, or do you want me to
Just
stop?
quickly, yeah.
Very quickly. The retail funds take $17 billion of superannuation monies in a normal year. The industry funds take $17.4 billion. The SG component of the retail funds is $5 billion. The SG component of the industry funds is 17.2. This is planned for life data. The salary sacrificing for retail funds is $12 billion, driven by advisors. 2/3 of the people who pay for advice, commissions or whatever, flat fees, put extra money in. The industry fund extra money is probably about 100 million. It's not much. People might dispute that. So what I'm saying to you is that advice plays a key role here, and it's important that advice be in a product. If you look at some of the funds in this room, they're either cross-subsidising from some members to the other, and we don't dispute that. I think it's a good thing. Or they're charging people a flat fee which comes out of their account, or perhaps they're paying it outside, in which case there's absolutely no tax advantage, and you're probably not acting in their best advantage by making them do that way. So I just think that we shouldn't go out and do a jihad on advice in a product. It's entirely appropriate. It does give rise to conflicts of interest, but you've got to manage those conflicts.
Pauline, you've had a view on advice for some time. I mean, let's just say that there are some inappropriate people going to, people who don't really have the need going to planners and getting charged a lot of money for it. I know you've said sometimes they're going to planners when the fund could actually help with their own needs.
Look, I think when it comes to advice, we have to step back a bit. Bias in information, whether it's through advisors or providers or product issuers, bias is something that's in our industry. There's always conflicts there. You always feel your own product or your own service delivery is best for the majority of people who listen to you. I think the answer is more in looking at our advice model. One of the issues, and something I've been saying for quite some time, is around the scalability of advice. What people forget around, and I have a close relationship with an advisory firm, the cost of delivering full, comprehensive financial services is very, very expensive. If you want to assess the universe and all the product issuers and really analyse what the client is best possible at that time and review that client's needs on a regular basis, that is a high cost. The majority of people cannot afford that. And so as an industry, we've got to look at, well, how are we going to deliver advisory services that are objective as much as possible in relation to that member, are regular because people's positions change. The combination of salary sacrifice, co-contribution and soft compulsion one year may not be the same in another year. And then allowing them to have simple advice delivered electronically, over the phone, SMS, written, don't care, verbally over the internet would be fantastic. But we've got to pull apart advice, segment it and recost it, and then look for ways to deliver it that would help people, including looking at some sort of pre-tax dollars, tax deductibility, any sort of idea just to get it out there and get them coming back for it.
David.
Look, there's particularly some of the statistics that Richard's raised as opposed to the whole set of issues. I mean, one of which, of course, would be that the average industry fund member is younger, has lower income, lower account balance, and I don't think many of the financial advisors out there that were particularly interested in trying to get hold of their super just yet. With regard to some of the points about research into funds, all 20 of the top 20 best performing balanced funds over the past 5 years are not-for-profit funds. 16 of those are industry funds. If you're an industry fund member, on average you'll retire with $120,000 more than your average retail fund member just on fees and commissions alone. This is the statistics which has been out there in the public marketplace for several years. And yet it is unbelievable that if you go and see a financial advisor, they will not recommend an industry super fund to you.
It sounds like this area of advice. One quick one, Richard, yes?
Well, just very quickly, my research shows that approved product lists, at least at Macquarie private clients, have on them Rest, Equip Super, Sun Super and Host Plus. If you go to an Asgard advisor, the approved product list has got 15 to 17 industry funds, and they're all taken from the Chant West 4-star Apple ratings. So I just say, David, and the industry funds in the room, do not give up. This is a very important message. Well, David is by this laughter, but he shouldn't be, because you need to bang this drum and keep it running, because if people walk into a planner and they've seen your ads and they believe them, they should be asking for it, and the planner should have that on the list if it's been through the proper approval process. And I'm saying it's not impossible, because there's two large players out there. Asgard's got the second biggest advisor force, who have got those industry funds on their APL.
So they're on the list. Whether they're being recommended or not, it's another hurdle to jump.
Well, I know advisors who put people in industry funds, right? And if I just know them, I don't know many advisors, but I know them. And so I'm just saying, don't give up on that process. And the other thing too, I could just add to this, think about putting industry funds on the platforms.
Okay. Well, it sounds to me like Nick Sherry's going to get a few questions on financial advice tomorrow when he comes to talk to us.